Hi, I'm Jess, CEO and founder of Rework It.
I'm Teresa Sweeney, a senior executive in finance and author, and this is Rewritten, real talk for working moms who want it all.
This is a podcast hosted by two successful working moms and friends who define success on their own terms and in very different ways.
But if there's one thing we both agree on, it's this: you can't have it all, but you can have everything you want. The rules just have to be rewritten.
Hi.
Hi, and welcome to our first episode of Rewritten. We are super, super excited to kick this off and really glad that you're here.
Yes, thank you for joining us and for finding us. I don't know how you found us, but we appreciate it. Although
We
we could just sit here and talk to each other without anyone for hours anyway. So,
we just figured we would bring you all into the conversation and then it would be a little more fun.
yeah,
Um,
well, let's actually talk a little bit about that, Teresa. We have kids, we have husbands, we have jobs, we have hobbies, even, and maybe friends and family. Why in the heck would we add to our plate and decide to do a podcast?
I love that question. Yeah. And again, like so many working moms, I feel like both of us have extremely full plates with everything that we have going on. Personally, what really inspired me here was this whole idea of seeing a lot of the women that I've worked with in numerous parts of my career just really struggle with how much changes when you become a mom. And really how in so many ways, like all of us really want to have the careers that we had before and want to continue them and want to continue growing. And there's so many facets of our lives that are important to us. And yet, especially as working moms, you wake up every day and it can feel like you're just pulled in 1,000 different directions. And there's so many demands on your time. And so, really what prompted this conversation for us was really around this idea of like, how can we help? How can we help women just get kind of more of a grasp on how to ultimately build a life that reflects how they want it to look when there's so much going on?
Yeah, I agree. Part of the reason why I'm here is mostly because just you asked. But the other part is exactly what you said. And I do often feel like I have to play the role of the expert, and I'm sure you do too. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, at some point, of just there's not a lot of room to be yourself when you're in these corporate environments, when you're in these professional environments. We have to look like we have it all together all the time. And I thought this was a really interesting opportunity for us to just pull back the curtain a little bit, because I do think we have some expertise in that we've built these very successful careers, these beautiful lives that we're very happy and proud about, and not everyone gets that. And so there's something that we can share there, but we also don't have it all figured out. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to just be vulnerable and share about the things that we're not sure about or we have maybe controversial opinions about, and just talk it out and let people in on it. And to me, that's very exciting, the opportunity to do that. And you and I have been friends for over 20 years, and we'll talk more about how we met, but we're also very different in a lot of ways. And so I thought that would be really interesting for folks to see that there's many different ways to get to the top, quote unquote. There's many different ways to carve that path, and there's probably something here for everyone, just based on how different we are in that way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think especially this orientation around like this really being kind of a team sport, if you will. Like personally, I benefited so much from advice that I received from mentors and friends along the way about how to navigate this. And I think like part of the essence here is that nobody's alone in this journey. Like you've got support, you've got an ecosystem of people that can help you navigate. And like if I learned anything from this journey, it's just how, and obviously it inspired the title for this podcast and these conversations is like how much you really need to hold the pen on your own journey and on your own adventure to like really make it reflect like what you need. And I feel very fortunate to have received that advice in a point in time where I really needed it. And the hope is that like that one that this is so empowering to our audience here, and that also again that we can continue to explore these conversations, these themes that we're all struggling and facing and challenging with or encountering, and really make each of our lives even better.
Absolutely. And I think something you said about not feeling alone in this, part of it, I think, is the way that our career started for both of us. I think
Yeah.
both of us were actually very lucky in that we did have access to support groups and formal mentors and formal mentorship programs. But I think a lot has changed in the last 10, 15 years in the career landscape. And I think a lot of young women aren't necessarily starting their careers with those same access to support systems. And so I think a lot of people do feel alone, or a lot of people
Totally.
are trying to figure out where do they find the right information and advice. And I think that's part of what we're doing here is this is our way of paying it forward because we benefited from that. So let's actually talk a
Yeah.
little bit about where did our journey start together? Where did we meet? Where did our paths align? And then where did it start to take a different path?
Yeah, well, I think it's so funny because I mean, we first met freshman, sophomore year of college. Um,
Actually, I think we met before that. So I think I saw you on the bus during scholarship interview weekend.
oh, that's probably true.
Yes. And I
So
remembered
funny.
you. And then then fast forward when we actually both ended up we went to college at Washington University in St. Louis, otherwise known as WashU.
Oh, shoot.
It's in St. Louis, damn it, was our tagline because nobody knew where we were at the time, but I swear it's a good school. And we met during this scholarship interview weekend was the first time. And then our paths, took a couple of years before our paths really cross again in WashU's business school.
Yeah.
So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and it was so funny because, to this point of community and mentorship, like, I came into school, my parents were both doctors, so I really knew nothing about business. I was kind of starting from this place of like, I like math and I like people, so business question mark. Didn't know what I didn't know, and I was very fortunate to be in a business fraternity and an undergraduate business school council where there were so many juniors and seniors who really helped me understand like what's possible here, like what's sort of the space you can play in, and what are the different options and relative pros and cons, and what have people done and what have they learned. And I remember just like one of the most impactful things in my life in my early career was a conversation we had at the beginning of
Oh,
sophomore year talking about, I don't know if you remember this, but well,
no.
you do because where it led, but I'm talking about kind of what you asked what I was going to do the next summer after
Mhm.
sophomore summer. And I was like, I don't know. I kind of managed to swing this internship in New York after my freshman year. And I said I was interested in investment banking, and you were like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm in the sophomore program at Lehman Brothers. I'm super happy to send in your resume. It's really small. They don't target WashU, but like,
Oh, that was so
happy to throw
nice
it
of
in."
me.
So nice of you. And it was a massive break for me. And I wouldn't have gotten that in without you. And then we were there for 2 summers together.
Wow.
Um
I didn't even remember that I did that, and so that's crazy, but I think that just emphasizes the point. I think why our friendship has been really strong because I think it's always been rooted in us being willing to help other women and help others. I'm the person like I
Totally.
don't think it costs me anything to pass on opportunities. I
Yeah,
think a lot of people come from a scarcity mindset and they hold on tight when they have something and they don't want to share it with others because they don't want
totally.
competition. And here I was and I'll tell you how I got that opportunity. It was another like privileged luck thing. And then I had a family friend who was a senior executive at Lehman Brothers at the time, Stuart Lindy, who was a huge mentor to me. He's since passed and we miss him dearly. But he was the one who said to me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I feel like you had like a lot of clear intentions. You've always been this person who kind of like knows what you want and then you just move mountains and make it happen. I've really stumbled into things, very much so. And so I was only at Lehman Brothers because my family friend said, "Hey, you should go into Lehman Brothers. They're looking for smart women and we need smart black women because this is still an industry that was still like very heavily white and male." And he said, "You're really smart. We're trying to bring in more diversity. You are a perfect type of person for this." And he helped me get into this sophomore rotational program. And then they have the more formal, like junior, regular internship program. And yeah, I guess I told you about it and was just like, yeah, like what it doesn't cost me anything to
Yeah,
give you an opportunity to apply. I'm not on the, selection committee. I can't give you the offer, but I can give you the opportunity. And that's nice to know that you remember that and that
totally.
you appreciate that. That feels good.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was massive. I mean, it had a huge impact. And then, and both of us spent 2 summers there. And, then the fall of 2008 happened. In some ways, it actually makes me think of like this moment for a lot of people generally
Mhm,
who are graduating now of sort of how existential the AI threat feels and what's going on
mhm.
with hiring. I mean, that was the world that we entered the workplace into.
Yeah. So you're talking
And
about the financial crisis of 2008, which
yes,
happened for us right after our junior internship summers,
Yep.
leading into full-time offers. And in our case, it resulted in a full-time offer from Lehman Brothers basically disappearing overnight, which I was actually overjoyed about. So I I didn't tell a lot of people this, but I spent those summers there and I just sat there being like, this isn't for me. Like, because I see people like you and some of the other folks that were in our programs and like you just got it. And I had no freaking clue what the hell was going on most of the time. And I was just I probably could have fallen upward a little bit, but I knew that there was going to be a ceiling for me if I really didn't feel like I got it.
Yeah.
And I would have had to put in so much time and effort to figure it out. And I just didn't want to. But I didn't know how to turn down that
Ooh.
offer, right? Because my
Yeah.
parents were so excited about it.
Well, and it's so funny because it's one of those where it's like that, certainly at the time, that was the most prestigious thing that you could do out of school. Like it was really
Yes.
those were the jobs that everybody really really wanted. And honestly, like, I had the same impression of like, wow, I really don't like banking. um and it was interesting. I spent my last summer in their private funds investment group, so it was sort of a derivative of private equity. And I really liked that. And I came out of that summer really wanting to do private equity, but in more of a principal capacity. And what was exciting to me was this whole idea of like, how could I help the companies that we invested in really build better and stronger businesses? And the idea of then like the best foundation to build that brought me to consulting, and this whole orientation of like, what are the types of problems that companies face? How do they think about them? Where do they get stuck? Where do they ultimately pay a ton of money for help? And I thought that would be just a really interesting place to get kind of a crash course. And what's so funny is like, is you were preparing for the same internships, or same full time jobs,
Yeah.
and then obviously exactly to your point on the idea that it's not there's no scarcity mindset here. There's always more pie. Like you and I worked together for I don't know 2 months probably, where
Mhm.
every week we'd get together a couple times a week and like give each
Practice for
other
the case
cases.
studies. Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, practice these case studies for the interviews. What are the core components of the consulting interviews were what they call these case studies, where they would walk you through a problem, and really just see how you thought, about kind of breaking that down, into a solution.
Yeah, and you
And,
can't get a consulting offer without mastering the case studies. So it was something that you
totally.
really needed to focus on. But I think what's really interesting, I want to actually just go back to a second to something that you talked about. And I think that's central to why we started this podcast as well, which is both of us were in quote unquote the most prestigious career. We
Yeah,
got into the investment banks, which is where everyone wanted to be. We had tons of classmates who would have killed for those jobs.
yeah,
And both of us sat there being like, I'm not sure it's for me. And I think part of this whole idea of like rewritten is writing your own path and being intentional about it. And I think
yeah,
that started early on with us both being able to take a great opportunity and saying, no thanks. And there's a lot of people who don't do that. There's a lot of people who just accept what's given to them because they feel guilt or they feel like they should just be grateful. Just shut
yeah,
up and be grateful or don't ask for more, or they fear of, again, the scarcity mindset. If I turn that down, I want anything else. And I just don't want to
totally.
overlook how, from an early on, we made these decisions of saying, yeah, that's prestigious, but there's something else that interests me. And I, like you, was actually sitting in the investment bank. I was on the equity research board, which is so boring. And so quiet. You're like sitting in his cubes, nobody's talking. And I'm just sitting there like researching Deloitte Consulting at the time. And that's how I knew I shouldn't take this offer. But like you, I felt like when I was at the bank, I felt like I was a news reporter standing in front of a burning building saying, like, the building's on fire. And I was like, I don't want to stand there saying the building's on fire. I want to pick up a bucket and throw it on the fire and
Totally.
help. And to me, that's what I thought consulting was like, this is my way of actually helping to put out the fire. And that's what drew me and my interest to consulting.
Yeah, it's so, so, so funny. Yeah. And then meanwhile, for me, it's like my hard pivot, the second hard pivot was then getting the private equity job that I'd always wanted or, wanted for a long
Hmm.
time. And then having this reckoning of like, oh my gosh, this whole time I had this, really idealized view of in that seat how much I could help the companies we invested in. And my wake up call was being very involved with one of our portfolio companies, and where I kind of basically got seconded to the business. I ended up spending a ton of time on the ground with that company, really
Oh, I
helping.
remember this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
really
was
taking.
confused what your job was at the time, actually.
Are you an investment professional? Why
Yeah,
are you
you
there?
were just like an operator at the time. They sort of like put you in the company. Now, you
Yeah.
didn't enjoy that, is what I'm saying.
So what was interesting was, like, was actually, to me, it was this massive wake up call of like, oh my God, what I can do when I'm there is so different. Like, it was this huge realization of, I just didn't have anywhere close to the context, the detail, the nuance, like sitting in sort of the ivory tower, if you will, as I did when I was on the ground. And to me, it was like, this question of, do I want to be in the investing seat, which I really did enjoy. There were parts of that were super interesting, but I had so much more fun when I got to really like shape and drive a business. And what's been interesting was, I decided to leave. I pivoted out into something that was a little bit more hybrid, and then kind of made a full pivot into the operating side. And now I'm in a role where it's operating and strategy, but for an investment firm, which has been a fun evolution. But for years after I left, my mom just kept asking me like, "Are you sure you ever should have left?" I took a big pay cut. In her mind, it was a gamble. And, in a lot of ways, I remember thinking and feeling at that time, there I just I look around and I see so many people who are successful doing a lot of different things, and I had this little sort of glimmer of a belief in my heart that, like, I was going to be able to figure it out. And partly taking the leap was like really taking that bet on myself and just believing that I could do it. And what I learned along the way was just, I mean, massively empowering, and I think kind of helped like lead this very intentional mindset throughout the rest of life around like, what do I really need to make space for, protect, give time to, cut out, by the way, to ultimately have the life that I wanted to live.
Yeah, and I think what's really sticking with me about what you said is a lot of us feel like we have to answer to our parents even as adults.
Yeah.
And it's very real. We don't want to let them down. I work with a lot of clients too who are, first generation as well. And there's a lot of like trying to make your parents proud embedded in that. And whether or first generation or not, we don't want to let our parents down. And there's this always joke, especially when you're a consultant, like your parent has no idea what it is you do. And you're just like, are you going to be okay? Because your parents were doctors. My father was a lawyer. Again, business is just this big, giant slosh bucket that you don't really understand all the different roles in it. And speaking of like what's changing, the jobs that exist today didn't exist even when we graduated college. They're
Yep.
constantly changing. And so I heard you also like listening to yourself around paying attention to like, ooh, this is interesting. Ooh, I like this, and listening to that and leaning into it and not listening to the external pressures of, oh, you should do this. This is the path that you have to
Totally.
take. Yeah, and let's also acknowledge you've turned down money along the way as well.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's
Lot.
certainly, if there's one constant in my whole career path, it's no, no, I'll take less money, please. Thank you. Right? If you think I started investment banking, then I went to consulting, which is still high paying, but less than investment banking. Then I went to corporate, which is less paying. Then I went to startup land where I took even bigger pay cuts, right? And then I started my own business where I was just like, you know what? Don't even give me money. I will just figure it out myself. But I will say I'm a billion, thousand, million times happier today and with each of those moves than I was at the highest paying job that I had. And to
Yeah.
your point, it's trusting in yourself. I will figure it out, right? Like when I made this last pivot to starting Rework It and building my own company, I thought about to myself, okay, if I make this change, I moved from like strategy and operations into basically HR. If you look at a company and you think about which departments are the lowest paying in the company, HR is one of them. And I had a lot of feelings about that. I did. I had a lot of feelings like, oh, it's less prestigious, it's lower paying. Like, how am I going to reach my financial goals if I keep giving up money? But the moment of clarity I had was, okay, well, if I do something that I'm good at and I really enjoy, don't I think I'd be able to make more money because I'll be able to ascend a lot higher
Yeah.
than doing something that like I feel kind of mid about and I'm like struggling to really learn? I think there's going to be a cap. And I knew that from the moment I stepped foot in Lehman Brothers. There's going to be a cap to how
Yeah.
successful I'm going to be here. And I think that's part of this idea of, writing your own rules and writing your own career path is success is however you define it. And you will be a lot more successful when you're honest with yourself about what it is you're good at and what you like and what really drives you.
Totally, and I love that concept of the ceiling because at the end of the day, it's like, uh, when you are so energized and have such strong belief in, like, what you're doing, I think that's so much more empowering. Even, like, one of the frames that I found really helpful early on was this whole idea of, like, really just having a hypothesis that you're using to evaluate what it is that you like, what lights you up, and I remember even going into my internships and early jobs around, like, all right, the elements that I like are some of the more complex analyses we do. I love getting to know the management teams. I really enjoy getting to know this space and thinking about the problems. What I don't like is feeling like I'm putting some different numbers in the same model. Or just like what are the
Need a
elements?
monkey.
Yeah, it's like what are the elements that like really light you up versus not? And just it's almost like the recognition that you're not going to get that perfectly right from the jump, but you've got a hypothesis written in pencil
And I
that you
think
could
that's really important, this idea right now, because
totally.
you're not going to get it right from the jump. Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of us, and I see this a lot with folks who are coming to me in my coaching services that are maybe in their first or second job, and they feel bad about themselves because they're not in the perfect job yet, and they feel like they're a
Yeah.
failure. And I could look back now and feel like none of the changes I made and none of the jobs I had were failure. There's something that I learned in it, even learning what I didn't like, and then I just pivoted along the way. And I think we have to be
Totally.
willing to experiment in life and to form a hypothesis and to say, okay, let me go try it, gather data, and not necessarily in a scientific way, but even just like, let me gather information what I like to what you're saying, and then use that to pivot a little more. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
us in this culture want immediate gratification and immediate change, and change doesn't happen in one leap. It happens like, it's like trying to get out a small parking spot in New York City. Like it's a lot of small turns,
Yeah.
but eventually you got the car out, which didn't look possible from the start.
Yeah, and sometimes too, it's like, the individual steps may not fully be coming together for you at a particular moment, but then you sort of look back at some point, you're like, oh wow, like everything led me here. And exactly as you said, it's the things that I learned along the way that all kind of came together. I mean, I think it's just so funny the role that I'm in now is this almost like seemingly impossible combination of so many of the things I've done in different points in my career, and like it turns out that my experience was exactly what they were looking for, and it's sort of an amazing sort of fit of the leveraging of my skills of the things that I enjoy and what I feel like I'm best at with what they needed, and
And
sometimes I
so many
think
people look at their background and think that like, "Oh, I can't tell the story. I've done too many different things."
yeah
And that's a perfect example of no, because you've had all these different unique experiences. There is a job out there that's looking for this, Frankenstein creation of you. You just have
yeah
to keep going out there and looking for it. And that's
yeah.
fantastic that you found it. I feel that way in my job. I get to do now all the different things that I like in this weird Frankenstein type of way.
Totally. Yeah. And it's interesting too because so many of these themes also I think apply to motherhood. I mean, it's like especially coming in, as we talked about a little bit earlier, there are just so many more demands all of a sudden on your time of whether it's volunteering to be class parent for your kids' daycare or like going to XYZ birthday parties every weekend from now until forever or signing up for different extracurriculars or figuring out your schedule for your kids. I mean, there's a million pulls and ultimately like I think it's this same level of intentionality around like where do you fundamentally actually want to dedicate your time and attention
I
versus
think that's important because
not.
you are ahead of me in the motherhood game. Your kids are a couple years older than mine. My kid is, one and change at the time. And so, yeah, like how do there are a billion different ways to be a mom and a billion different pulls. Like how did you
Totally.
start to decide what is your version of the life that you want to live? Like what does
Yeah.
success look like to you in that way?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So we have 2 kids. We have an older daughter who is 6.5 and a son who is about to turn 5. And our daughter was, very much a COVID baby, born in August of 2019, and, the world shut down when she was 7 months. And I when I had first gone back to work after having her, I was literally on the road every other week. And we had a service through my employer called Maven Milk, and I was literally FedExing breast milk all the time.
I've heard of that. Okay.
It was so
Yes.
hectic. It was a lot, like traveling, you're traveling with like all the
Yeah.
pumping gear and just I mean, it was a
I
whole
I was
whole
just in my apartment here and, like, wanting to pull my hair out. I can't imagine being on the road and doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild. And then but in a lot of ways, like, I consider it a massive blessing for I was where we were in life, because obviously all the travel ground to a halt. And all of a sudden then I got to be home all the time, and the company I was at also took a pretty conservative stance about return to the office. So I didn't have to go back in for a long time. And we had our son in May of 2021, and so
What
it really
shifted for you when everything halted and you came back home? Did you have, like, some sort of light bulb and new realization come off about, like, what it is you actually wanted your life as a parent to be in
Yeah,
relation to work?
well, so what's so interesting is like I did in 2 ways. Like one was like I had a super understanding boss at the time who was like, however, he's like, I know women who thought they were going to want to return to work full force after they had kids and just really had a switch flip when they actually had a baby. And then I had women who did not have that, who were just like super excited to get back into it. He's like,
Yeah.
so whatever you decide and want to do is okay. And for me, that was extremely empowering. But then the other piece of it was like and the bigger change for me was I started a new job when our son was about 9 months, and I had a conversation with a female mentor of like, look, I can't imagine this place I'm going is going to be more flexible than my last job was, just given everything that had happened. What do I literally what do I
What do I
do?
do?
Yeah. And she gave me the best advice, which I'm so grateful to have received it. And I'm also glad I listened to it, which was like, just don't ask for permission for anything. Do exactly what you need to
Oh,
do. Carve out the
holy
time you need to
smokes.
protect, block it in your calendar, like, and just everybody else will figure it out. Get your work done, keep stuff at a high level of quality, but like nobody will defend this for you. And you like negotiating against yourself about when you think you're supposed to be there versus not is only going to make you frustrated and burnt out.
Wow, that's advice I haven't heard someone else give. I feel like I end up giving it to my clients, but that was, like, really well said, which is do not ask for permission. Right,
Yes.
because you're giving people an opportunity to say no. Also, the people who are you're asking permission from, let's be honest, are probably the men who are not raising their kids, and so they don't know what the hell they're talking about anyways. So they're the last people I
Yeah.
would ask for permission from. And to your point, she wasn't saying like, dip out, don't show up to the work and be like, sorry, I gotta go to daycare, like couldn't get my work done. She's saying, just get your shit done and
Yeah.
do what you gotta do to do it, and nobody will say anything, mostly.
Totally. And that, like, by the way, she was totally right. And there were definitely some circumstantial things of like, I had a great boss. He never questioned anything. He was a really good guy. Like there were definitely elements of that. But like at the same time, it was mostly just that like I was the first there was one other person on the team who had kids, but she was remote. She was in like a different setup, and so it was like really, in a lot of ways, I was setting the tone for what it looked like to have kids on the team, and there was a big responsibility in a lot of ways that came with that too. And I knew it was like
Yeah, you're
and
going
and
after that for everyone
interestingly,
who comes after you.
1,000%. And I had seen examples of, in another job, like somebody had a kid, a man had a kid, his wife welcomed a kid on the Friday, he was back at work on the Monday. Like
Yeah, I think we all
literally
know that. That was the norm in some,
yeah.
again, you work in finance, which is that may still be the norm today in many ways. And
Uh,
in this situation, it sounds like you had to actually start with figuring out like what is it that I want and what works for me. And I
yeah.
don't think enough people actually pause to ask themselves that question because if you don't know what you want, how are people supposed to give it to you? Um, and
Yeah.
make space for it. It has to start with you.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, like, even especially as you get into parenting, and especially like the older your kids get, I found it really helpful in Pamela Druckerman's book, Bringing Up Bebe. She talks about this idea of the frame, and I love this idea. Like basically, what she's saying is there's sort of this set of guardrails, if you will, around the standards in your family, the rules that you hold or not. And I found this to just be like a very empowering mindset frame to have
Mhm.
around parenting of what are fundamentally the things that me and my husband wanted to protect. And I think the other element of that that's so critical is you as partners, if you have one, like really getting clear on like what is important to us. And it's not about making things that are important that aren't, or like feeling like you're supposed to enforce certain rules. Like the whole idea is what matters to you. And for us, this whole idea of like we felt very strongly that consistent dinner with our family was a big one. So
Mhm.
going home at 5 for me to like make sure I was home for dinner and bedtime with the kids, and having very good schedules and sleep routines so that we had time for ourselves afterwards, that our kids were well rested and felt their best too. Like
Yep.
all like these couple little things made a huge difference, and and some experimentation along the way of like figuring out what worked. But ultimately, that was what got me to a place where it didn't feel like just surviving day to day. It felt like I was actually able to like live the life that I wanted to.
Oh, and that's really powerful because I think that's what we as working parents feel like we lost the
Yeah.
most is we feel like our world has completely changed. And by you figuring out like, what are those table stakes that will bring the normality to us and make it feel like I'm in control, I think changes your whole frame, to use your word, and the way about it. And for me, I don't think I saw it as so much a frame and like what do we want to hold dear, but I'm big on questioning why.
Yeah.
And all my professors and bosses in my life have loved that, obviously. But I'm always questioning, like, why? Why are we doing that? Does it make sense? What is the purpose of that? But that's actually really helped me push back against the shoulds and the supposeds and really make my own rules. So even, I had my first kid while I had this business. And so I had the opportunity to do whatever the hell I wanted. But I know a lot of business owners who try to be back in 2 weeks, 6 weeks. And I said, why? I don't know anything. None of us know how my pregnancy is going to go. None of us know how my delivery is going to go. None of us know how my child's going to be after delivery or how I'm going to be physically, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
I don't know any of that. So I'm not going to make any promises. I'm going to tell all my clients, I'm going to close up all my clients. I don't have any of them waiting for me to come back like we're in the middle of sessions. I'm going to close that all out before I go. And while that has an impact to my business, it gives me the space to just show up and do whatever I need to do because no one can predict what's going to happen. You don't know if your kid's going to end up in the ICU. You don't know if your body's going to be completely torn apart. If I'm going to have a C-section and really need like 6 weeks of healing. I also didn't know what it was going to feel like to be a mother. Was I going to feel like I wanted to go back to work after? In reality, I couldn't wait to get back to work because infants were not really great for me. I needed that routine, and not having a routine and a baby who like stuck to a routine at like 3 weeks old was very challenging for me. I loved it when we could get back to, work and baby could go to daycare. But that's what's important. To your point, sleep was another thing. So I work with clients all the time, coaching clients, and they come to me and we go through a lot of deep work together. And when people talk about what's getting in their way of growing and showing up as the human they want to be today, it never traces back to, well, I was breastfed or not breastfed. It never traces back to like which daycare I went to or did I have a nanny. It's always traced back to usually, of course, there's usually a parent to blame. Sorry. But it's usually about like I wasn't loved, or my parents were divorced, or I felt too much pressure, or my parents didn't give me enough attention. And so
Yeah.
for me, what I took from that is like the most important thing I can do for a parent is set things up so that I have the energy to give my child attention. And I have the energy and the calm so I don't scream at my child. Right. What do I need to be able to show up as my best self? And like you said, it was things like sleep. We're going to prioritize sleep and we're going to sleep train because I know that's so important to everything else. And I've never heard any client complain to me because they had the fervor method used against them. Okay. This is just what I have taken from things. But I think it's understanding, like, to your point, what is important to me in my worldviews so that I can show up and be the human that I want to be. And that enables me to be the best parent that I can be.
Yeah, definitely. And like, and again, I think it becomes so easy to like sort of should your way through parenthood and just feel like you are ultimately a prisoner to like all of these expectations or demands that everybody else has on you. And especially that orientation on like how do you protect yourself in that environment, because I could not agree more with everything you just said, which is that it's when I feel like any time where I looked at my parenting and not felt proud of it, it's always been in situations where like I felt compromised, like something was sort of stretched thin and I just didn't have the
The
patience or the
energy and the
bandwidth,
patience.
yeah, to deal with something on that day. And when and by the way, that also 1,000% applies to work. And
Mhm.
I look at like when I'm able to protect those things that make me feel like my best, I show up better absolutely everywhere. And it obviously it means some hours get allocated to that instead of to work or something else. But everything I spend is way higher impact because I'm like optimizing my own performance, if you will, in all of the spaces that matter.
Well, it also talks to this idea of a lot of times clients will come to me and they almost talk about it like I have my work life and then I have my home life, as if we are two
Yeah.
separate people and two separate things. But what you just illustrated is how what happens at home then shows up in how we show up at work, right? Because we're only
Yes.
one person and one human. And what happens at work, we then bring home. And so we really do have to focus on how we're showing up at work and how we're showing up home because they're so intertwined. And so the
Yeah.
best thing you can do for work is actually focus on how you're showing up as a parent, right? And spending time with your kids so you're not feeling stressed about it. The best thing you could do as a parent is make sure you're taking care of your stuff at work so you're not bringing home that stress, right? And then that's
Yep.
showing up to how you're being a parent. So I think that that comes to this idea of like we have to define like what does success and happiness look like for us. And I think what I love and what interested us in doing this podcast is we both feel very happy with our lives today. Um, and that feels like bragging to me a little bit when I say it out loud. Like I don't know, it feels like a little dirty to say. I don't know why I'm like afraid to say that. But I also know like a lot of people don't feel that way. But I
Yeah.
don't think we should feel ashamed for it because it's not like we stumbled upon it. We both have made some very tough choices in order to get rid of the shoulds and to carve our own path. So what's like a moment where you feel like you really took a stand and that led to this place of where you can say, I'm successful and I'm happy?
I mean, honestly, I trace so much back to that moment of doing exactly what you need and not asking for permission. That to me was like the moment easily where I felt the most like, "Oh, this is mine to create. Nobody is going to do this for me. Nobody is gonna, like, make sure that I've sorted out everything I need to." And I love this lens. There was, something I listened to a while ago that sort of had this concept of, like, the things that we carry around with us, whether it's the baggage, the stories, whatever, and it was this question of, like, "Are you gonna carry this around with you until the day you die?" You're
Mm.
like, "Oh my god, of course not." It's like, "Well, the day before you die? Like, a week before you
When do
die?
you let it go?
Month
Yeah.
before you die?" Yeah, like, let it go. And for me, what I needed to let go of was this idea that anybody other than myself could really shape and create my life in the way that was gonna provide this sense of fulfillment and, like, really deep gratification. And ultimately, I totally agree with you, by the way, on, like, what being the privilege, if you will, of like feeling like in a place now where I'm happy. But it's, the whole intent with this is to share it. Is like I think there's effectively sort of secret sauce behind this, that everybody can and should have access to, that hopefully helps you create your own life like that is exactly what you wanted it to be. And a big part of all of this is like, there's no one right answer. I love also what you said, Jess, about the idea of sleep training. It's like, by the way, even on sleep training, there's a question of sleep train or not, and then like one of a bunch of different methods. There's no one right way to parent. There's no one, and I think even with some of the social media things, like there's this idea that there's one way to talk to your kid when they're upset. There's one way to handle a tantrum. And like there are a million ways you can respond to
We need a
so
couple
many
of
of these
we need
things.
different tools in our toolbox, not just
Yeah.
we just walk around with just a hammer.
Yeah, and it's this idea of like, going through a little bit of like, what's possible? What are some ideas? What connects for you? How do you fundamentally want to show up as a parent? Like that, for us, there was this lens of my husband and I would talk about the situations that we found challenging, whenever something happened, like the first big tantrum,
Mhm.
waking up in the middle of the night when they used to sleep amazing. It's like it's actually a real question of how do we want to handle this? How do we want to show up in these moments? Like, what do we want to do? And that was like where all the power and confidence came from. It was this like we started to be able to say like we are acting in a way that's in alignment with the parents that we want to be, and it was very grounding, and it helped just inspire a ton of confidence in the approach.
Yeah, and I think this is what I really like about this conversation is it comes down to again like we're different people, we taken different paths, right? Like you had to fight your way inside one of like the most old school uh type of institutions in corporate life, which is like the financial world, right? It is probably one of the least flexible fields out there in terms of who's adopting new ways of thinking and the old guard. But you found your way and your version of success there. And for me, my version of that was realizing I need to stop trying to fit in to these molds.
Yep.
And I need to put myself in a situation where instead I'm attracting the people who see me, who understand me, who believe me, and want to learn from me, as opposed to like trying to force it when it's not going to happen. Like fetch is not going to happen, basically. So, and for me, that meant leaving the corporate world and going my own way. And those are both different paths that we took, but led us to places where we can both say, like, I'm really happy. And I know that I would not have a kid if I had stayed in the corporate path. For
Yeah.
me, it's just thinking about like the your values and the life that you want to live. Like it was incongruent to me to be able to live that life and do this. I needed the flexibility, like I have today, to be able to do whatever I want and not have to ask permission, in a place where I knew I wouldn't get in trouble for it. Because I do think there is more flexibility for some of us in the workplace than for others. And there's more scrutiny for some of us than others. Like I'm a Black woman. I couldn't get away with as much stuff. Sometimes it felt like I was more under a microscope. And so I needed that ability to just be free and do what I want. But I approach the same way with my clients, which is like, I don't work Fridays anymore. I just stopped working Fridays. And guess what? Nothing bad's happened.
Everybody figures it out.
If we do a stay the same, like it's fine. And sometimes we feel like people are going to push up against us a lot more than they are, or that we have to take one specific path. And that's what I'm really enjoying about this conversation is just exploring like what are all the different options and what makes sense for you in your family.
Yeah, totally. And just to really emphasize the point, I mean, as a friend and seeing you go through this transition, I feel like you opened up in a huge way. Like it was clearly so deeply gratifying, freeing for you to take that leap. And like I know I said to you at the time and I continue to feel it. Like I think it's amazing that you did what you did. And you've obviously done it in a way that's made you so successful in the biggest sense of the word. And that is really powerful. I think it's a really neat model for people to have.
Yeah. And so that's, I think, more of what we're going to talk about in the next couple of podcast episodes and continue to explore, which is what are these different paths that you can take to success? Um, how do you be true to yourself? How do you figure out what your values are? How do we deal with guilt that shows up? How do we pay it forward as well? How do we come from this place of abundance so that you can offer, apparently, like I did, 20 years ago, hey, yeah, I can send in your resume, no problem. And that can open up a door for someone and change the trajectory of their life in ways that you couldn't have even predicted.
Totally. Yeah. Super excited to continue the conversation. And along the way, too, if you have thoughts, ideas, questions, feel free to shoot either of us a note on social. We'd be super excited to connect. But look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm Jess Wass,
I'm Teresa Sweeney.
and we'll connect with you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.